Into the Pit is a small roguelite movement shooter released in 2021, and it's a pretty alright game. It's also got nothing to do with Five Nights at Freddy's, since that franchise has a game by the same name. This game is about using magical powers to slaughter a slew of demons in order to save a village from dark powers that were beyond their reckoning, and in the process try to find a missing family member. It's fairly lacking in variety, and the roguelike elements aren't as strong in comparison to other games like Balatro, but I do quite like it, and that's why I'm talking about it here. Let's dive into the details now so I can explain why. The game opens with a brief scene wherein our protagonist is walking towards the village you'll be spending a lot of time in, while recounting the events that led them there. Our protagonist doesn't actually have a name, so I'll call them Bob to make things a little easier. Bob's cousin, Luridia, has gone to the village in search of more arcane knowledge, and Bob suspects that something has gone wrong since she hasn't written for an unusually long time, and so now Bob has sought out the village in an effort to find her. Once you arrive in the village, you'll find it's almost deserted, with nobody in sight, and be prompted to ring a bell on a specific door. This is how you interact with all NPCs in this game, and this first one is the town clerk, who explains the problem. Ruination is upon them. A profound evil is emanating from the great pit under the village, the town alderman has disappeared, and all the villagers have left with him. He asks you to visit the ritual keeper and discuss how to potentially solve the problem. The game then prompts you to open your inventory, which consists of 4 tabs as well as a couple of sidebars that have some extra bits. The first tab is your status tab, which keeps track of your tasks as well as the number of villagers you've rescued from the pit, which currently stands at a less than impressive 0 out of 45. The second tab is runes, which would show you all the runes you've acquired, but you don't have any right now. Tab number 3 is progress, which shows how many dungeons you can access and how many you can complete. But since we don't have access to any dungeons yet, this tab is empty. And the last tab is the journal, which is fairly important, as this tab contains journal entries written by Luridia, of which we start with 4 and can find many more in the dungeons. Those initial pages are addressed to you, with Luridia explaining that she knows you will follow her to the village and is leaving these journal entries, believing they will be found by you. Finally, those sidebars contain information on motes, the various magical currencies that we'll go more into later, villagers rescued, again, and powers, which will be important momentarily. Now, before you actually go talk to the ritual keeper, you'll see that there's several other villagers we can talk to first, so I'll go over them briefly here. The Rune Carver tells us that he would sell us support runes, but unfortunately he can't until we rescue at least 1 villager. The Keymaker wants us to rescue 3 villagers so they can make ritual keys for us. The Enchanter will upgrade our support runes, but requires us to rescue 9 villagers first. And the Merchant, who, after rescuing 18 villagers, will allow you to convert currencies into other currencies. These are all services that will make a bit more sense after we visit the Ritual Keeper, so let's go do that. The Keeper explains that the pit used to be a source of great riches for the village, apparently, but the alderman gathered a bunch of runesmiths and other villagers and went into the pit to perform forbidden rites for unknown reasons, and as a result, the village has now become surrounded by an evil storm causing demonic earthquakes and whatnot, and the Keeper begs us to try and fix it, since, of course, a random stranger such as yourself will have the skill set required to do so. The Keeper tells you they have placed enough runes to perform a basic ritual on the shelf outside, with those runes consisting of 1 key rune and 3 support runes. Pick them up and you can head to the ritual altar and prepare to go into the pit. Once you interact with the glowing sigil, you will be prompted to present some runes, with there being 4 support slots and 1 key slot. The key slot is for your key rune, of course, and the key runes are what determine which realm you'll delve into to progress the game. Support runes, meanwhile, are how you acquire upgrades of various effects, though your only options right now are the 3 the Keeper gave you. Once you set everything up, you can go into the pit and enter the Obsidian Fortress, which has 3 villagers to rescue, so you better get on that. And how do you rescue them? Well, that question is what leads us into... Upon entering the pit for the first time, the Ritual Keeper will speak to you through a scrying orb a few times to introduce gameplay mechanics, but we're just going to ignore him for now while I give a more detailed breakdown. The first thing you'll be doing in the pit is choosing a couple of powers to start with, 1 for each of your hands and 1 for your armor. The armor enchantment is just going to be a selection of 3 random upgrades that you can acquire at any given time. Things like various forms of damage resistance, enabling an enraged mechanic for extra damage, or many other forms of damage bonuses under certain conditions. There's a lot of potential upgrades for your armor, but I'm not going to go over all of them since there's not much to say. The real meat here is what you can give your hands. I said earlier that this game is a movement shooter, and this is where that starts to come into play, as these initial hand upgrades are you choosing your weapon types. Let's go over each option. The Needle. Fire many accurate projectiles with medium range, basically an assault rifle. The Cannon. Fire powerful projectiles that deal heavy damage with long range, sort of like a burst fire sniper rifle. The Nebula. Fire a tight spread of projectiles with a long range, sort of like a shotgun sniper combo. The Shotgun. It's a shotgun, pretty self-explanatory. The Fan. Basically the shotgun with more range and more pellets being fired. The Swarm. The Fan, but with even more spread. The Hawk, a normal sniper rifle. The Bomb, a rocket launcher with high damage potential, but has its effectiveness hampered severely by the fact that you can hurt yourself with your own bombs. I would say use with caution, but it's probably better if you don't use it at all. There's some decent variety here, on paper. In practice, some of the weapon types do overlap a little, like the Shotgun, Fan, and Swarm all being minor variations of the same weapon. The important thing to remember is that you are likely to never get the same two weapons twice, as when you are selecting them, the game gives you 3 different options for each hand. Also, while it is sometimes possible to get the same weapon on both hands, I personally would recommend against it, as being able to assault different ranges is key to success, mostly because there are some suicide bomber type enemies that you don't want to get close to. Once you've selected your weapon types and your first armor enchantment, you are then able to explore the floor you're on. In order to progress deeper, you'll need to activate 4 altars on the current floor, and each altar has 2 chambers attached to it. Each of these chambers possesses a different resource, and you need to pick which resource matters more to you, as you can only pick 1 chamber per altar, meaning you can only ransack half the chambers presented to you. So what are the resources you can get anyway? Let's start with those motes I mentioned earlier, as they make up the bulk of what you'll be collecting. In order, we have Chamber of Wealth, awards motes of gold, which are spent unlocking both key runes and support runes back at the village. You'll be needing a lot of these, so best stock up when you can. Chamber of Insight. These are pretty uncommon and award motes of insight, which are spent back in the village on upgrading those support runes of yours. Chamber of Embers. Awards motes of fire, which are exclusively spent on unlocking new key runes. You don't need a ton of these in comparison to the other two, but they are still important. Chamber of Renewal. Awards motes of renewal are first transient currency, meaning they're lost as soon as you leave the pit, with these motes specifically being used to re-roll your upgrade choices. Chamber of Luck. Awards motes of luck, which increase your odds of getting stronger upgrades based on how many you have. And the Chamber of Blood. Awards motes of blood, which operate a bit differently from the others. Normally, when you run out of health, you die. But if you collected enough motes of blood, you can cheat death and immediately get half your health back. By default, you need to collect 10 motes of blood, and then if you end up consuming them, you need to collect 15 more. If you're doing exceptionally poorly, you need to collect 22 to cheat death a 3rd time, and so on and so forth, with it continuing to increase. Unfortunately, you can't stock up extra motes ahead of time. Once you have enough to cheat death, any further motes you collect just evaporate, which is kinda lame. So those are all the currency ones, but you don't just earn motes for entering them. When you enter any of these chambers, you will discover a room filled with enemies, and the motes are just kind of scattered about the place for you to pick up. You'll want to deal with both, of course, but the actual objective you need to complete is finding the keystones that keep the altar deactivated and smash them, a process that takes a couple of seconds, so you'll definitely want to prioritize enemies first. The game does also tell you when you've collected all of the motes in a chamber, so you shouldn't need to take too long to get all of them. Smash all the keystones, and you'll be booted back to the central chamber with the opportunity to acquire a new upgrade. The game will offer you a choice to apply a new enchantment to one of your hands, or your armor again, with there being one option for each category. Armor enchantments are all the same stuff as before, but hand enchantments can take one of 2 forms, either applying an element to your hand or strengthening its base abilities. Elements can consist of things like venom, bleeding, weakness, frost, and so on, with you only being able to apply one to each hand. The more general upgrades, meanwhile, can be things like increasing crit chance and power, base damage, and some other more unusual options. Each upgrade can go up to 5 levels. Each upgrade can go up to level 5, with upgrades increasing it by 1, 2, or 3 levels, depending on what you're offered. Now, it's worth mentioning there are 4 additional types of chambers you can explore, none of which involve any combat, and you'll still get these upgrades from them, meaning that you can use those chambers as a way to speed things up, with those chambers being Chamber of Healing. Contains a healing fountain that will instantly restore about half your health. Chamber of Blood Magic. Contains a special altar that you can interact with, which will allow you to sacrifice a chunk of your health, usually around 20%, to level up a random enchantment. You can continue to do this as long as you have enough health. Chamber of the Lost contains a missing villager who will head back to town once you're done here. And Chamber of Respite contains a journal page from Lyridia as well as a chest with random motes in it. All of these chambers just have one keystone for you to smash and will likely not take you longer than 10 seconds to clear. Once you've activated all 4 altars, you can then descend deeper into the pit and make further progress. You can also use the elevator to head back to the village at any time, but there's not really much reason to do this, since the only thing you lose on death is the motes you've collected in your current chamber. Once you make your way through 4 levels of the dungeon, totaling 16 chambers, you can descend into the heart of the dungeon. This final level contains a boss fight against the dungeon's guardian, and if you can beat them, you'll be rewarded with an extra villager and a journal page. Then, as you leave, the village alderman will appear and speak to you, usually to taunt you by saying that your efforts are wasted and you'd be better off laying down in the dirt and giving up. But we're not going to do that. It's time to get back to the village. Now that we've rescued 3 villagers, we'll have access to some of the village's stores. The rune carver opened up after 1 villager was rescued, and you can buy new support runes in exchange for gold motes. The carver promises a wider selection once more villagers have been rescued, though you only need 5 to access his whole stock. Sadly, there isn't a ton of variety in the support runes on offer, as most of them fall under one of 3 categories. Those being motes, runes that increase the number of motes you earn or let you start with some motes upon entering the pit. Survivability, runes that improve your resistances and increase your health and healing. And upgrades, runes that manipulate the odds of being offered certain upgrades that belong to specific categories. 3 villagers got us access to the Keymaker, so we can buy new key runes from using motes of gold and fire in order to access new dungeons. Once you've purchased 1 new key, the Ritual Keeper will upgrade the sigil to allow you to activate 2 keys at once, merging 2 dungeons together to create an entirely new one with more villagers to rescue and monsters to destroy. The first 2 keys can be purchased immediately, the 3rd and 4th keys require 12 villagers saved, and the final key requires 30 villagers saved. And the last key is very special since it opens the final dungeon of the game, meaning you only need to rescue 2/3 of the villagers to actually finish the game. Moving forward, once you save 9, the Enchanter opens up, and will upgrade your support runes in exchange for motes of Insight. Upgrading a rune to level 2 costs 5 motes, and level 3 costs 10 motes, but level 3 isn't an option until you've rescued 18 villagers. Also available once you get to 18 villagers is the Merchant, whose sole purpose is to act as the currency exchange. If you don't need gold motes anymore, as an example, you can use the Merchant to turn them into fire or insight motes, whatever you need in that moment. That being said, you are most likely to end up using the Merchant to acquire more insight motes than you will gold or fire. Once you have access to all the village amenities, all that's really left is to finish all the dungeons, and this is where the game's biggest flaw reveals itself. The different keys ensure that the dungeon environments change, and the enemies change to an extent, but unfortunately every dungeon is pretty much the same. As I alluded to earlier, there isn't a lot of variety in the upgrades you get during runs, and it'll only take a couple of dungeons for you to see pretty much everything you can get. While there are technically 8 different weapons you can use, some of them are so similar that the actual amount comes out to only 4 or 5, not helped by the fact that gameplay doesn't change much based on what you take, unless you use the bomb weapon, but that weapon kind of feels like too much risk for not enough reward. Ultimately, most of my runs boiled down to me sticking to the close-range options like shotgun and swarm, and running around at the speed of sound, keeping both triggers pulled until all the enemies were dead and motes collected. Then I'd go get the keystones. Doing 15 dungeons like this gets pretty tedious after the first 5 or 6, so I imagine most people probably didn't put in the effort to actually finish the game. I did 100% the game, but that had less to do with my personal enjoyment, and more to do with the fact that I wanted to make this video. As I mentioned earlier, however, you don't actually need to complete all 15 dungeons, you just need to rescue 30 villagers in total so you can buy the final key rune, which will lead you to the... This gets its own section, since it's the final dungeon and the key cannot be combined with any other key, which implies the dungeon will be different in some capacity. Unfortunately, it is not. The only things that are different about this dungeon are the new environment that kind of looks like a corrupted version of the village, which is neat, and there are no Chambers of Respite or the Lost. Other than that, this plays exactly the same as every other dungeon, much to my disappointment. The other big gameplay difference is that the final boss is, of course, the Alderman who's been talking shit to you the whole game, and he isn't all that different from the other bosses that you've fought multiple times up to this point. He is only half the size of the normal Pit Guardians, so that can make it a little harder to land shots on him consistently, but other than that, he isn't particularly unique until you kill him. Then, after a few moments, he'll resurrect himself and start Phase 2 with a refilled health bar and wings that allow him to fly. But this second phase is even easier, since he mostly just lays traps on the ground as his main method of attack. Once you defeat him, Luridia is nowhere to be found, but you will find her final journal page, where she states that she's gone through the portal behind the Alderman, which apparently leads to the Land of the Dead. So you'll hop through that portal to follow her, at which point the credits start rolling, signaling the game's end. After the credits finish, you'll be booted back to the menu, and if you reload your game, you'll be put back in the dungeon just before the Alderman fight. So that was underwhelming. But before we wrap this up, there is one more topic to cover. Into the Pit has a grand total of only 10 achievements to earn. Most of these are things you'll just be getting as you progress in the game, but there are a couple I wanted to direct special attention to. The first one is the Moneybags achievement, which is for collecting 100 motes of gold, which is a little misleading. I'd assumed that this one just popped once you've done exactly that, collected 100 motes of gold in total, but what it actually wants is for you to possess 100 motes of gold all at once, so you better start saving. The second one is the Comeback Kid achievement, which is for cheating death 3 times in a single run. This is most easily accomplished by using the Rune of Blood, which makes it so that sometimes you get double the motes of blood when you pick them up, and then let yourself die on purpose to consume the motes and pick up new ones. That being said, this will still require a little bit of luck, since you need there to be blood chambers to get motes from in the first place, so this might take a couple of attempts. The last one is the Avid Reader achievement for collecting all 36 journal pages, which might not sound particularly difficult, but it's the rarest achievement for a reason. And that's because, unfortunately, you're not likely to get every single journal page after going through each dungeon and completing it. You'll probably have to replay dungeons a few times, so you can get Chambers of Respite in order to get all of the pages gathered together. I had to repeat the Obsidian Fortress, the first dungeon, probably 8 or 9 times to actually finish my collection of journal pages, so it got rather tedious and annoying. That's it for noteworthy achievements, though, so let's finish this up. And that's Into the Pit. While I did have some more serious criticisms near the end, mostly regarding how repetitive the game gets once you have access to everything, the boss fights weren't super interesting since most of them could be beaten pretty easily by just circling around them and firing constantly, and the regular chambers become significantly easier to clear consistently once I started using the runes that allow you to heal when collecting motes and smashing keystones, since those make it so that you are almost constantly regaining health and therefore making it significantly easier to succeed. Ultimately, I do like the game, but by the time I finally finished, I was definitely ready for it to be over. So do I recommend this game? I'd say it's worth a try, but probably only if it's on sale, since the default price of $15 might be a bit too much for a game that doesn't really have enough to it. That's all I really have to say about this game. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing, and I'll see you next time.